confessionary of a sane person. It all started with the car keys, right? That's where it began. What happened was, I left for work in the morning, as I always did. Or I should have, were the car keys not missing. So I sat up from my car and went back into my house. I looked at all the usual places: the kitchen counter, the bedroom drawer, the couch. But the damn thing was nowhere to be found. I gave up and finally decided to call my wife. And the goddamn woman had brought my keys with her accidentally. She came back a couple of hours later to give me back my keys. And so I finally left home. Since I was already so late, I figured that if I stopped by a coffee shop, it wouldn't really make a difference. So that's what I did. And that's when everything got worse. After the woman had already finished preparing my order, I discovered I had forgotten my wallet. It's those awkward scenarios you hope never happen to you. Well, it did to me. So I drove back home to look for my wallet. And I went over my house once more. The kitchen counter, the bedroom drawer, the couch. Nowhere. Again. Then I called my wife to see if she had also grabbed my wallet accidentally. She denied it. And, well, you never know with people these days. But I decided to just move on. I went after my neighbor. It must have been an hour or so after I lost my wallet. The last time I saw it was when I was discussing with him in the condo meeting. But that is not the point. Well, I told him about what happened, and I asked politely if he had seen my wallet. But that old man never liked me. He just acted like I accused him of stealing it. That deranged man started screaming like crazy. I always knew he was psychotic, but not on this level. Well, that was it for me. I was sure that the old man had stolen my wallet. So I tried to sneak into his house to get what was mine. It should be a right of a person to retrieve what is theirs. So I tried to enter the house, and he tried to stop me. It turns out that man is not only frail mentally, but also physically, because the old bastard broke his arm. From then on, things got out of hand. A lot of people had to come in, and none of them heard my side of the story. I still think that man stole it, but I can't prove it. Not now. To add insult to injury, he got the condominium trustee to put a restraining order on me. Well, it's not an official one, but the result is basically the same. You see, I am just a sane person living in this mad world and trying to survive, doing my share, not asking for more than what I need. All I look for in this life is peace. But the world keeps getting in my way again and again. I've given up on retrieving my wallet, but I had to stop that man from using my credit card. So I tried to cancel it. But I'm a mere mailman, or I was before I got fired for not showing up on time. They skipped the step where I explained what happened and that I lost my keys and all. But businessmen these days don't care about real people, don't they? Sorry, I lost my line of thought. What was I talking about again? Right, the credit card. I searched for what to do on the internet, as you do these days. And the steps were clear. Contact your issuer, block your card, review recent charges, and get a replacement card. Simple, right? No, I called the issuer, and they said they had to verify my identity as the card holder before taking any action. Which seems fair at first, but then you realize it's a scam, so they don't have to do a damn thing. How did they expect me to remember my parents' full name? These insane people expected me to know my mother's maiden name. What kind of person knows these things? As soon as I called, the first thing I noticed was that this was going nowhere. Well, not really. The first thing I noticed was actually that the man's voice on the hotline sounded exactly like my first grade teacher. Nasty men, I tell you that. But that was a close second. Well, after making all those stupid requests, he finally started to get reasonable. He asked for stuff like my name, address, birthday, the things that a sane person does remember. But it did not last for long. Soon he was asking me about recent transactions. How am I supposed to know? My wife also uses this credit card. Tell me, how was I supposed to know the last purchase was at Sephora? So he got unreasonable again. He asked me for a scanned copy of my driver's license or passport. He said it was for verification purposes, but you never know people's intentions. Have you seen the newspapers exposing these billionaire companies stealing data from common men like me and you? In the end, he said he would have to cancel my card because they could not identify the real card holder, which was exactly what I wanted from the very beginning. If these people only listened to me. I lost my line of thought. I was hoping that if I kept talking, it would come back to me. I was trying to look for it as I rambled. Oh yeah, right. Sorry. Now I remember I brought this up because you kind of look like a banker. My old boss looked a lot like you. You remind me of those businessmen on TV. Do you know how to set up a new credit card? I mean, I don't want to go through all that nightmare again. My wife is already angry at me for a lot of things. If you could help me with that, I would be eternally grateful. From the moment you walked into this store, I knew I had to talk to you. You seem like a reasonable person who would help me. Anyway, thank you for choosing McDonald's. Your order is ready for pickup. Will you be paying with cash or credit card? Where pirates came to die. A breath of wind slithered through the ruins and tumbled across his weathered face as he pressed the shard of limestone down the dry ashlar wall, leaving a new etched tally mark. It was a dimly lit chamber inside what was once the world's most notorious pirate prison. For him, it was a sanctuary, a place of refuge. Once the web developer for Shackleford Inc., in a city of skyscrapers, eclectic culture, and ultra-modern technology, Tom Malone scanned his Neanderthal calendar. 240 tallies made up the wall. Some were circled, and only he knew why. Gone were the titles of husband, employee, and neighbor. Given his isolated surroundings, the term castaway was more appropriate. A life filled with country club galas, company retreats, and exotic travel was lost. Survival had replaced living. Tom buttoned his slightly torn flannel shirt and grabbed his coat. He exited the chamber where the wrought iron door, rusted and bent, hung by a single hinge. He moved down the main corridor and stepped through a hollowed-out gap in the outer wall. The Rook, as it was called, was made up of 3 layers, undoubtedly to make escape near impossible for even the smartest buccaneer. If the legends were true, the Rook had seen the likes of Edward Davis and even Black Anthony zipping his coat. He trudged down the path to the beach. This was his routine every day. 2 laps around the island. The overcast sky produced a gloomy horizon, but that was normal for this time of year, or so he assumed. If the tallies were correct, it should be October. The sea was a gray mass of rippling currents. Tom breathed profoundly, absorbing the salty fragrance. The flow of the ambient tide took him back to simpler times when walking on a beach meant hunting for shark teeth, metal detecting for forgotten coins and jewelry, and collecting seashells that made their way into the guest bathroom. Such days seemed as far out of reach as the horizon. Suddenly, he spotted tracks. They snaked from the north before turning about just outside the Rook's outer wall. He recognized the tread patterns as those of a Jeep Wrangler. Tom followed, occasionally glancing over his shoulder. When he reached the familiar bend on the beach, he heard the blast of a horn and dove behind a line of palm trees. Peering through the trunks, he noticed a docked ferry on the beach. A jeep was climbing the ramp onto the ferry. Personnel in neon-colored jackets moved about the deck. Another search party, he thought. A mustached man in uniform, wearing the same jacket, examined an area in the sand. He spoke into his radio before moving further inland. Tom's heart leapt into his throat when he caught sight of the woman following behind. She wore a yellow raincoat, and her arms were folded tightly as the sea breezes pushed ashore. Her curls flailed and whipped, no matter what direction she faced. She said something to her uniformed companion and advanced toward the tree line. "No," Tom muttered, before slipping back from the bend. He tried to quicken his pace, but the dry sand absorbed every step. Once back in the chamber, he dropped to the floor and focused on slowing his breathing. The acoustics had almost given him away during the initial search months earlier. His heart drummed, and his temporal pulse thumped. He caught his face in the mirror, fragment by the tally wall. It had belonged to the mirror in the cabin cruiser's bathroom before Tom dismantled the $1 million yacht upon his arrival. He gazed at the worn face and graying beard. Then there was the scar, where scalding grease once landed. "Tom!" came the woman's voice. He pressed against the chamber wall like a spy dodging a spotlight. "Mrs. Malone, we've searched the ruins before with no luck." He assumed this was the uniformed man. Tom felt his way down the chamber wall and gripped a loose stone. After a few careful tugs, it came out of its place. He reached into the cavity and pulled out the dust-covered Glock. "Tom!" Squeezing the seasoned grip, he inhaled deeply, closed his eyes, and exhaled. His mind traveled to the frost-covered day after his father was buried. Tom opened the gun cabinet and retrieved the pistol his father taught him to shoot with. "This will be yours someday," he would say at the range. Tom choked back the mist that wanted to erupt from his eyes. None of it matters now. Too much has happened. He took another lungful before pursing his lips and blowing out. He eyed the tallied wall and totaled the circled marks. 16. He suspected as much, but now he knew. One bullet remained. "We need to call off the search," he called out, his voice nearer than before. That meant she was too. "No, he's here. I know it," came her distraught and shaking voice. Tom pressed harder to the wall. He hoped the ancient stone could absorb him and conceal any trace of a man desperate to remain in the shadows. "Ma'am, the weather is slowing us down, and the city cannot afford a stranded ferry with personnel on board. Would you stop if it was your... not if it meant putting others in danger." He ran his free hand over the scar. He traced the tight line of skin that ran from beneath his eye to the corner of his mouth. The sting had subsided long ago, but the hurt ran deep. "Please," she pleaded, "just let me look in here." The man radioed the ferry that he was making a final sweep of the old ruins, and that preparations for departure should begin immediately. For a moment, all was still. "Tom!" came the frantic echo. He slid his finger over the cold trigger. "Never again will you scar me, Maria," he whispered. A single shot rang from the remnants of a place where pirates came to die. When the world went gray. Prologue. Joy, happiness, life, creation, the spark of beginning, the heartbeat of Earth itself, the endless manifestation of color and beauty and light, blossoming, growing, unfurling into something infinite. And then, one day, nothing. The world once bursting with radiance, was swallowed whole, devoured by an oblivion so complete that even memory faded to grayscale, leaving behind only the cruel, inescapable taunt of black and white, a silent mockery of what once was, shadows of what had been clung to the charred land beyond our shelter, reaching with desperate fingers toward a sky that had long since turned its back. And as the relentless nothingness took and took and took, we were left only to bear witness, to suffer in the empty remains of what we had destroyed. And as the world faded to monochrome, I became one of the countless shades of despair. Our city, once flooded with bustling citizens driving cars of every color, is reduced skeletal frames of buildings and cracked roads. A cruel reminder of the countless nights I spent, sleepless, hidden away in my attic, thriving off the colors coating my paint palette. The word around us hasn't just been burned, it's been erased, the vibrancy stripped away. I look around our underground shelter, and for people struggling to survive, everyone was perfectly content with making conversation from the concrete where they sat, as if they weren't on their deathbeds. We scrape by with the rations the leaders distribute weekly, our bodies weakened by hunger, our minds fractured by the unbearable monotony of a world without color. But it isn't the hunger or paranoia that haunts us, but the weight of absence, the memories of color fading with each passing, dissolving to add to the torture of the ash flakes contaminating the air. Black, white, gray, repeat, every damn time. And then I find myself thinking the same, though I thought, since the day the world was drained of color. This is a dream. Colors can't just disappear. And yet, here we were, in this mere sketch of what was a vast land that stretched on through the remains of the nuclear tragedy, colored in shades of ash and bone, where nothing grows and nothing dares to blossom. For now, I resort to my only escape, my eyelids suddenly feeling too heavy, my mind too weary. Symptoms we've long since accepted as the norm, and allow myself to relax against the concrete wall. Part 1. Rations are low. Too low. A small group of us was sent into the depths of our despair to scrounge together enough food to ensure our, at the least, survival. Survival doesn't always grace the entirety of our measly society, and it's unfortunate. But death, even at 17, is not an unfamiliar fate. I look out into the rubble, finally lifting my eyes from my sneakered feet for the first time since they stepped beyond the shelter's entrance. The land is silent, the only sound the crunching of boots landing against who knows what, and the whipping wind nipped at my skin, scattering my once auburn-streaked hair across the back of my jacket. Black, white, gray, rep. A gleam catches my eye. We're at the edge of the ruins. That's impossible. My feet are already betraying me, already venturing closer to this foreign feeling of freedom. 5 years ago was the last time I was graced with the presence of color. 5 years since the bombs. 5 years since this world was diminished to a mere grayscale. 5 years. For color to still exist would be out of the question. I track the glistening spark of hope, forcing my eyes to stay open, forcing my feet one in front of the other, until, where'd it go? I blink. Scanning the scene, my eyes dart frantically from each piece of Colorly's scrap to the next. Come on. Come on. Come, nothing. The unmistakable feeling of wilted grass prickles at my knees as they hit the ground where it was. The hope of color in an achromatic world slipped through my hoary fingers like sand slipping through the grasp of the ocean spray continuously. Elara? Sienna, one of the other young scavengers ask, kneeling down in front of me. You okay? I blink back tears I didn't know were welling, forcing composure I don't have, even as I feel the feather-light touch of Sienna's hand on my shoulder. I know I can tell Sienna the truth. She did take me in after the bombs killed my parents, but to burden her would be to break myself in the process. Yeah, my voice is breathy, as if I'm questioning my own answer, while letting the first one that comes to mind slip past my lips. If anyone is going to believe me, it's going to be her. She is the only family I have left, after all. I thought I saw color. Sienna's muted, but still striking. Once blue eyes go wide, clawing to clench onto the sliver of hope and clinging onto it like a lifeline. Anything, everything. She leans closer, the shoulder-length, ashy hue filling her head, now slipping past her ear. If anyone can find it, it's you. She said it like it was the easiest thing in the world, but that was just the way Sienna made everything seem. Easy. Like it wasn't the sight reignites a desperate hope, a longing to believe that life in its fullest form is not truly gone. Part 2. I can't pretend like it didn't happen. I can't unsee it. I know it's risky. I know there are people here who need every last bit of help they can get. But if there's a better, beautifully vivid world out there, inching to be found, it needs to be found. So here I am, in the thick, inky embrace of the dead of night, my fingers curling tightly around the worn, chilled rungs of the ladder that stretches upward like a fragile, rust-bitten bridge to a world I have long since sworn, with every fiber of my being, to unravel, to tear apart piece by piece, if that's what it takes, all in pursuit of that elusive, flickering glint, something small, something distant, something that once dared to catch and hold the fleeting light of a bleached and weary sun. Because if there is one truth I refuse to let slip through the cracks of time, it is that color, in all its wild, untamed brilliance, is not just an indulgence, not merely an ornament to be admired from afar, but a necessity, a lifeblood that the world not only craves, but deserves to be drenched in, to be wholly consumed by. And if it is within my grasp to bring it back, to pry it from the hands of whatever force dares to smother it, then I will chase it, seize it, and deliver it without hesitation, no matter the cost. Singed, sealed, delivered. Address: a monochrome world once called Earth. Surrounded by rubble, I step out into the spotted sky and let the chill of a rare wind smack me right in the face. A stark contrast to the warmth seeping across my chest. I shake my head at myself and how I utterly disregarded the warnings of the other survivors and so effortlessly snuck out of the security of our shelter into the wasteland so eagerly. I glance around the land stretched out before me, waste crowding the ground and ashes polluting the air. And I swear the hues of gray, now illuminated by stars and a moon, that appeared as dots and a waning semicircle, were darker than black, everything meshing with the ink-stained sky. I will find it. I'll find it, if it kills me. I will. Then, just beyond the endless stretch of night, a shimmer, the faintest trace of warmth against the cold monotony. It's real, I murmur, though no one is around to overhear. It has to be. Part 3. I walk for hours, and it still feels like I've gone nowhere. I'm still surrounded by the gray void, still surrounded by remains of a better life, and still with the shimmering speck of hope before me, not stopping. The landscape is an endless graveyard of the past. Twisted steel, collapsed buildings, and roads that crack beneath my feet stretch on like the bones of a forgotten civilization. Everything is still. No birds cry overhead. No wind whispers through trees. Because there are no trees left to whisper through. The silence is heavy, pressing against me like the weight of the sky itself. I huff, pressing my back against a crumbling door, not bothering to look at the house, but rather the swing set across the road, peering intently as it swings back and forth in the stillness of night, moved by something unseen. Perhaps the ghost of the child who cherished it. A sigh slips past my lips at the tempting offer of sleep. But refusing to give in quiet yet, I push my weight forward. My feet drag, weighing me down. Black, white, great repeat. It's infuriating that I can't close the distance between me and my last hope of color. My eyes snag on a reflection in the road. My pace quickens. My footfalls echo in the empty, colorless world as I near the glinting surface. A mirror, cracked, dirt-speckled, abandoned in the middle of the road, like it doesn't belong. Like nothing belongs, I slow, breathing hard. My reflection stares back at me, distorted by the fractures spider-webbing across the glass. The same dull world is behind me, the same lifeless sky above. But beneath me, just beyond the cracks, something else, green, my breath catches. A patch of grass, impossibly vivid, bleeding through the reflection, as if it exists in another world, as if it's real, somewhere, somehow. I step forward, heart pounding, kneeling at the mirror's edge. My fingers hover over the glass. The colors look too bright, too alive, like they'd burn if I touched them. But I don't hesitate. I kick the mirror. It shatters under my heel with a sharp, crystalline crack. Splinters of glass scatter across the road, glinting like stars in the empty light. I brace myself for something, anything, a shift in the air, a tremor in the ground, a door opening where there was none before. But when I look down, the green is gone, just shards of broken glass, catching the darkened sky in their edges. Just my own reflection, fractured into 100 jagged pieces. I lurch forward, scraping at the road where the mirror used to be. Nothing. No hidden portal. No sliver of color left behind. My hands shake. Tears, clear wetness, drip down my cheeks in slowed fashion. My breathing comes in clipped gasps. I saw it. I know I did. The wind stirs, sending a few stray fragments skittering away. I watch them disappear down the road, swallowed by the nothingness stretching endlessly ahead. And then I keep walking, pushing harder, further, relentless. Part 4. I refuse to let myself stop. I won't. I can't. Not if I want any chance at finding the color I've recklessly craved. My eyes follow the path I left in the dust, the sun rising higher in the sky. And then, thunk, the ground hits me before I can brace for it. Pain shoots through my skull in sharp, electric volts. I glance up, dazed, and see the thick trunk of the tree I just slammed into. Its rough bark pressing into my chest, pinning me to the earth. I wince, trying to push myself up, but my head swims with dizziness. The tree stands tall, towering over me, like an ancient sentinel, its branches casting long shadows in the early morning light. I can feel its strength, as if it's mocking my weakness, daring me to rise again. I press my palms to the ground, leaves crunching beneath them, and accept this tree's challenge. The rough earth presses against my skin, grounding me in this moment, daring me to rise. A chill runs through my spine as I push myself up, dirt clinging to my fingertips. The air is thick, damp, charged with something unseen but undeniable. Prepared to confront the tree, I stand to my feet and ball my fists, the tension in my body coiling like a spring. I'm ready. My knuckles tighten, breath steadying, until a sharp, almost imperceptible sting pricks at my palm. Crunch. My hand flattens instinctively, fingers twitching as I feel the sensation spread. The leaves, crisp and brittle, stick to my skin like they belong there. A brief annoyance flickers through me, and I almost brush them off without a second thought, until something stops me cold. The color, not gray, not black, not the dry, lifeless husks of darkness. These leaves are green. It's faint, fading, dying, but it's there. The realization steals the breath from my lungs. Green here, among the decay. Color still exists, but it is fading. The world is not truly black and white. It is dying in slow motion. The nuclear bombs did not erase color. It severed life's connection to it, leaving only those who remember it to witness its vanishing. A smirk, one I haven't worn since the day of the bombs, breaks across my lips. It all makes sense. I have to find the color. I have to find the... What about everyone else? What about Sienna? I cut myself off, bending to gather a handful of dull leaves from the ground. Sienna would want this. If anyone can find it, it's you. My grip on the leaves tightens, as if I can hold on to her words, onto her, for guidance like I always have, and I intend to do just that. One step for hope, another for faith, 2 steps for a new life, another for Sienna, and then I'm sprinting, not daring to look back. Thin, strange paint. Deborah had always been a solitary artist, pouring her heart and soul into her work in a dimly lit studio that smelled of turpentine and linseed oil. Her latest masterpiece was a vibrant canvas depicting a mystical forest, alive with creatures that seemed to shimmer and dance under the flickering light of a nearby candle. As she painted the final stroke, the colors swirled and shimmered, as if the very essence of life had been captured within the frame. Unbeknownst to her, the painting was not just a piece of art. It was a portal to another realm, one that thrummed with whispers and secrets waiting to be uncovered. One stormy night, a curious art collector named Harold stumbled upon Deborah's gallery. He was immediately drawn to her latest creation, the forest, alive with colors that seemed to pulse in the dim light. Despite the warnings of the gallery owner, who sensed an unsettling energy emanating from the painting, Harold insisted on purchasing it. He felt an inexplicable connection to the artwork, as if it called out to him, promising wonders beyond his imagination. That night, he hung the painting in his study, entranced by its beauty and unaware of the darkness lurking within. Harold could not look away from the painting as the clock struck midnight. The figures within it, elusive woodland creatures and ethereal beings, began to shift and move, their eyes glinting with mischief and allure. They beckoned him closer, their whispers growing louder, promising secrets of the universe and glimpses of forgotten dreams. Each night, Harold returned to the painting, his heart racing with excitement and fear as he felt himself slipping deeper into its enchanting world. Days turned into weeks, and Harold's life began to unravel. He neglected his work, and isolation became his companion. Friends and family expressed their concern, but he brushed them aside, captivated by the beauty and mystery of the painting. In the quiet hours of the night, he would sit before the canvas, losing track of time as the figures danced and twirled, drawing him into their virulent realm where reality blurred into fantasy. The whispers became more urgent, more insistent, wrapping around him like a warm embrace. One fateful night, driven by an insatiable curiosity, Harold reached out to touch the canvas. The moment his fingers brushed against the surface, a surge of energy coursed through him, and he felt himself pulled into the painting. The colors enveloped him, swirling around him like a tempest, and in an instant, he was no longer in his study, but standing in the very heart of the enchanted forest. The creatures surrounded him, their laughter echoing like chimes in the wind, and he felt a sense of belonging that he had never known before. As days turned into nights in this new reality, Harold became a part of the painting, a mere shadow of his former self. He danced with the creatures, forgetting the life he had left behind, lost in a world where time held no meaning. Yet, deep within him, a flicker of awareness remained, a whisper of the life he had abandoned. The forest, once a place of wonder, transformed into a labyrinth of shadows, and the creatures he had once adored began to reveal their true nature, deceptive and sinister. In the end, Harold understood too late that the enchanting world of Deborah's painting was a trap, a seductive illusion that fed on his very essence. As he stood among the figures, now twisted and grotesque, he realized he had become one of them, a mere echo of a man who had once been alive. The painting hung in his study, a beautiful facade hiding the darkness within, whispering secrets to anyone who dared to gaze upon it, inviting them to join him in the eternal dance of despair. One rainy afternoon, a friend of Harold's, Claire, knocked on the door of his house. She had grown increasingly worried about him since he had purchased the painting. Harold hadn't returned her calls in weeks, and she felt an unsettling urgency to check on him in person. As she entered, the air felt thick, charged with an energy that sent a shiver down her spine. "Harold!" she called, her voice echoing through the dimly lit hallway. There was no response, only the sound of raindrops tapping against the window. Claire moved cautiously toward the study, her heart racing. The door creaked open, revealing the painting that had captivated Harold's very soul. She gasped as she stepped inside, the vibrant colors of the forest contrasting sharply with the shadows that loomed over the room. The painting seemed to pulse with life as Claire approached it, and she felt an inexplicable pull, as if the figures within were beckoning her to join them. But something was off. The forest looked darker than she remembered, and the laughter of the creatures now sounded like haunting whispers. "Harold!" she called again, her voice trembling. Suddenly, she noticed a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye. It was Harold, standing eerily still before the painting, his gaze fixed on it as if he were entranced. She rushed to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Harold, are you okay? You've been gone for so long. I was worried sick." His head slowly turned to her, but his eyes were vacant, as if he were staring through her rather than at her. "Claire," he murmured, his voice distant. "You have to see. It's beautiful here. You can join me. We can be free." Fear gripped Claire as she looked back at the painting, where the creatures now gazed hungrily at her, their smiles widening. "Harold, this isn't right. You need to come back with me," she pleaded, shaking him gently, but he shook his head, a hint of desperation flickering in his eyes. "You don't understand. This is where I belong now. The forest. It holds everything I've ever wanted. You can't leave it. You have to stay." His voice grew softer, almost pleading. "You have to join us." Claire's heart raced as she realized the truth. The painting had ensnared Harold, twisting his mind and spirit, and now it was trying to lure her in as well. She took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to escape. "No, Harold! You have to fight it. This isn't you." At that moment, the creatures in the painting began to writhe and stretch, their forms becoming more grotesque, their laughter turning into a cacophony of chilling echoes. They reached out with elongated fingers, as if trying to break free from the confines of the canvas. The air grew heavy, thick, with a malevolent energy that made it difficult to breathe. "Join us, Claire," they chorused, their voices a twisted melody that tugged at her heart. "It's beautiful here. You'll never feel pain again." With a surge of resolve, Claire grabbed Harold's arm and pulled him away from the painting. "No, you're stronger than this. Remember who you are," she shouted, her voice breaking through the haze that enveloped him. For a brief moment, Harold blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "Claire? What's happening?" "Just breathe," she urged, her grip tightening around his arm. "We have to get out of here." The creatures within the painting howled in fury, their vibrant colors darkening as they sensed their prey slipping away. The shadows in the room twisted and churned, threatening to swallow them whole. Claire pulled harder, dragging Harold away from the painting, and as they stumbled backward, the connection between him and the canvas began to fray. With one last desperate attempt, the creatures lunged forward, their claws reaching for Harold. But just as they were about to grasp him, Claire shouted, "No!" and yanked him out of the study, slamming the door shut behind them. They stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath, the oppressive weight of the painting's energy dissipating. Claire turned to Harold, who was finally coming back to himself, confusion and fear etched on his face. "What just happened?" he gasped, shaking as if waking from a nightmare. "You were lost in that painting," Claire said, her voice trembling. "It was trying to take you, to keep you forever. But we escaped. You're safe now." As relief washed over Harold, he looked back at the closed door of his study, where the painting hung silently, its colors muted in the absence of his gaze. "I didn't realize. I thought I was free." Claire placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You were caught in its spell, but you're stronger than it. We need to get rid of that painting before it claims anyone else." With newfound determination, they returned to the study, where the painting seemed to loom larger, its colors still swirling with a hypnotic allure. Together, they hatched a plan to destroy it, to sever the bond it had formed with Harold, and ensure that no one else would fall victim to its seductive trap. As they prepared to confront the darkness within the canvas, they knew that the battle was far from over. The forest might have tried to claim Harold, but together they would fight to reclaim his freedom and banish the malevolent forces that lurked behind the vibrant colors. The whispers from the painting grew louder, but this time they would not be silenced. The painter of souls. It was the first time in 2 years that the group of friends had reunited for this trip. After many cancellations and unfinished plans, Everyone had made an effort to make this outing a reality. They hadn't spoken much during the funeral 2 years ago, and it almost seemed as if their friendship would dissolve soon after. But through the video game chats they frequented, nostalgia and good memories rekindled the bonds that had weakened with the loss. They talked about how competitive Bennett had been in many of the games they played, how he would ask for rematches multiple times, failure after failure. They spoke about how he would have wanted them to spend time remembering him, just like this, with laughter and anecdotes. The three of them went from contacting each other through video game chats to messaging on their phones and making video calls. "We should go on the trip," Arlo had suggested one day during one of their group calls. There was a long silence before Thiago said, "Do you mean—" "Yes," Arlo confirmed. The travel plan Bennett shared days before. "Before what happened? Are you sure?" Roman asked. It was his idea, and he was the most excited about it. We never understood what had motivated him so much to organize this trip. "He wanted us to meet someone," Arlo said. "That's the only thing I remember." "Someone in the middle of the rainforest?" Thiago inquired. "Well, it was also a sightseeing trip around the city, and a chance to visit many of the famous archaeological exhibitions in the area. The museums, too," added Arlo, who had, in fact, graduated in art history. "And what about the person you said he wanted to find?" Roman asked. "I suppose we don't have enough information to look into that," Arlo observed. "That's why I suggest we take the trip in his honor and try to enjoy it as the four of us would have, you know?" "That's not a bad idea," Thiago said, encouraged. "I could use a holiday. I need to get out of here. An excuse to take a break from my business." "And when was the last time we traveled together?" Roman added. "Let's do it." Just like that, the three of them made their preparations for the trip on the following weeks. They looked up information about their destination and its tourist attractions, paid for their plane tickets, and agreed to meet at the airport 2 hours before the flight. On his way to the airport, Arlo had decided to stop by Bennett's house. He knocked on the door, and it was Bennett's mother who answered. The woman looked at him in surprise, but she immediately moved to hug him once she recognized him. "My goodness, Arlo, it's been so long. I wasn't expecting to see you after the funeral. Come in, come in." She invited him inside. They entered the living room, where photos of Bennett with his siblings and parents filled every corner of the room. Arlo avoided looking at them as his mother offered him a seat. "No, thank you." He smiled politely. "I was just passing by to let you know that I'm going on a trip. Actually, the three of us are going. It's a plan Bennett shared with us before he left." The woman nodded, perfectly understanding what he meant. "Yes, the trip." He wouldn't stop talking about it. "I'm so glad the three of you have decided to go. Bennett would be so happy to know this." "I know," Arlo sighed. "I know we haven't spoken to you since the funeral. We tried to reach out, but it was very difficult." "I understand, Arlo," she said. placing a comforting hand on his arm. "I just wanted to stop by to tell you about our plans in person, and also to see his room one last time. I hope that's not too intrusive a request. I just needed to see the last space he was in." The woman nodded again, understandingly. "It's not intrusive at all. Go ahead, you can go in. To be honest, it's a relief to have someone else in that room, even if only for a few minutes. My husband and I are starting to feel the deep silence coming from it." His mother remained in the living room, while Arlo climbed the stairs to the room. He opened the door, and immediately, the unmistakable scent of Bennett's deodorant reached his nostrils, mixed with the smell of a closed-up room and the dust floating from the shelves. Most of his belongings and clothes were packed away in boxes that the family would donate to charity, but the posters and printed images on the walls had not yet been taken down. Arlo stepped closer to observe them carefully. Bennett used to draw a lot in his spare time. Despite having graduated in computer science and cybersecurity, his true passion had been drawing and sketching, something he had dedicated himself to in his free time, both inside and outside of university. On the wall were drawings that seemed to depict them, the group of friends, peculiarly colored in primary colors. In some drawings, Roman and Thiago were shaded in pink tones. In others, a slightly more purple hue. Bennett himself was shaded in gray. Arlo was always painted in red. Arlo gazed at the drawings with resentment, holding back the urge to tear the paper from the wall. During the first 2 days at their destination, the three friends spent their time at the 4-star hotel they had booked. When Arlo suggested going to the city center to explore, the other two sighed in annoyance. "We have a week and a half to explore whatever you want," said Thiago, still wrapped in his sheets. "We won't have the chance to enjoy this level of luxury once these holidays are over. You're the one finishing a PhD in history and art, Arlo. You can go without us," added Roman as he put on his swimming trunks, getting ready to head to the pool. Arlo irritably reminded them, "This trip is for Bennett. You know he would have wanted to see the exhibitions and museums. You've been saying that for weeks," Roman retorted, turning to face him. "What's with the sudden interest in what he wanted to explore? If I remember correctly, you always ignored all the drawings and paintings he tried to share with us." Now Thiago sat up on the bed, watching his friends as they confronted each other. "What's gotten into you, Roman?" Arlo asked. "I don't know. Why are you making us feel like you're the one who cares the most about his death and his final wishes? We mourn his loss too. Don't try to act like you're above us with your false moral code." Arlo simply pulled a small, crumpled note from his pocket and shoved it in Roman's face. This is the place he wanted to visit, along with the name of the person he wanted to see. Roman snatched the paper to read it himself. Thiago got up to take a look as well and asked, "Was this what you went to get from his house?" Avoiding the question, Arlo said, "I'm not trying to impose some false moral code on you. It's normal to feel guilt, but the best thing we can do is show a bit of interest in what he loved. That's all I'm trying to do." With that, he left the room. Thiago and Roman exchanged uneasy glances. "I have no idea what's going through his head," said Roman. Thiago shrugged, though his expression remained troubled. "You heard what he said. It's normal to feel guilt. I'm sure he's going through the same thing." An hour later, the three of them made their way into the city, stopping by the tourist spots they had planned in advance. This time, however, the excitement they had initially felt for the trip was gone. A sense of impending doom loomed over them, and there was nothing they could do to dispel it. All of a sudden, what had been a journey in memory of their friend was being exposed as the farce they had tried to mask with that ridiculous excuse. The last place left to visit was the shop. It was an art shop. From the outside, it had that vintage aesthetic that attracted art lovers looking for something unique and different, something timeless, stuck in time. The three entered cautiously. The shop was empty, and the light streaming through the glass windows fell upon the golden and bronze frames of the various paintings hanging and stacked everywhere. All the paintings depicted people, some in groups, others alone. At first glance, they seemed like photographs, edited in different colors, but upon closer inspection, one could appreciate the hand-drawn strokes and the pigment of watercolors and oil paint. The style of these paintings looks familiar, Thiago murmured. Without much enthusiasm, Roman nodded. Yeah, this is exactly how Bennett used to draw. The characters in the paintings were painted monochromatically. Each person in each painting had a certain tone of color assigned to them. Some colors were more intense than others. Background characters in landscapes or scenes were usually depicted in different shades of gray. In portraits, many were also colored in gray. The three had been so absorbed in the artwork that they hadn't noticed the man who had approached them to greet them. "Greetings," he said. The group startled and turned their attention to him. The shop owner wasn't as old as they had expected. He was likely in his mid-30s. He dressed just like one of them, except for the paint-stained apron he wore. His eyes were a peculiar silver color that stood out in the dim light of the shop. "We're looking for Keita," Arlo stated. "That's me," the man confirmed, pointing to himself. His strong West African accent was evident in his words. "I've been expecting you. Did Bennett talk to you about us?" Thiago stammered. With a rather calm demeanor, Keita tilted his head as if the answer was somewhat complicated. "He spoke to me about you the first time he came here. But that was also the last time I ever saw him," he said, turning to search through a stack of paintings behind him. Carefully, he pulled one out. "Exactly 2 years ago. This is what I painted." Keita placed the painting in front of them. Roman paled at the sight of it. Thiago still couldn't understand. and Arlo remained silent, pressing his lips together. The painting was a reproduction of a real photo. The four of them had taken 3 years ago on a road trip to the mountains. The picture had been taken with a camera set on a tripod. However, in this painting, only Arlo, Roman, and Tiago smiled at the camera, standing in front of a rocky landscape with waterfalls cascading into a lake. Bennett appeared as a gray shadow in the background, at the edge of the lake, a few meters away from them. Beside him, another gray figure crouched at Bennett's feet, as if crying. It looked like the figure of a woman. In the painting, Arlo was colored in a deep red, while Tiago and Roman were shades of maroon. "Where did you get this from?" Arlo demanded. "From the truth," Keita answered. "You guys remember exactly what happened that day, don't you?" No one answered. The silence itself was confirmation. "I can see the color of your souls from miles and miles away," the artist continued. "I don't need to know you to start painting what each of you inspires in me." His tone became more accusatory as he went on. Bennett had this gift too. He came to me because he wanted to learn more about it. And you, Arlo, you knew that. Roman turned to Arlo, stunned by such information. Yet you made him self-medicate with drugs so he would lose his mind and end up taking his own life, Keita continued. "I didn't want Bennett to die," Arlo protested, raising his voice. For the first time in years, he seemed to be losing his composure. "I just wanted him to forget and stop painting those damn drawings. He was going to get us in trouble." "You wanted him to forget her?" Keita asked. He walked over to his desk and picked up some drawings, this time on notebook paper, traced by a different hand. "Bennett gave me these during his last visit." Tiago held them in his hands. Upon seeing the frantic sketches of a cadaverous woman in black, gray, and green colors, he gasped, "My God!" and let the sheets fall to the floor in shock. No one bothered to pick them up. "She was on the way," Roman murmured, as if talking to himself, as if justifying it to himself. "She came out from between the trees like a mad woman. That's why we hit her with the car. She fell into the lake, and there was nothing else we could do," Tiago exclaimed desperately. "Why jump into the lake to retrieve a body that was already lifeless?" All that Arlo said to Keita was, "What do you plan to do with all of this? Send it to the police?" At the absurdity of his question, Keita replied, "I am not in charge of the punishment of men. Justice will be served, but not by me." His silver eyes gleamed as he spoke. "Just keep in mind that now 2 souls are tied to your fate." As soon as they left the place, the 3 of them didn't say a word to each other until they reached the hotel. The following day, each took their flight back home. In the following months, Tiago turned himself in to the police as an accomplice in the cover-up of the hit and run. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. When the police interrogated Roman, he revealed that although they were all drunk at the time of the incident, It was Arlo who was driving the car and who suggested they continue the trip. Roman was facing 2 years in prison. No one knew of Arlo's whereabouts. He seemed to have moved and changed his name. The authorities did what they could to search for him. But since the victim had been someone suffering from a mental illness and had run away from her own home, and therefore had little family who could report her disappearance, except for a sister, they were content with having 2 guilty individuals in prison and letting the one who escaped go free. Months after all of this, in their respective cells, Roman and Tiago received a letter in a brown envelope. The letter consisted of a pencil-drawn illustration showing Arlo drowning in a lake of skulls. The lake was the only part painted in a deep red, like blood. Master of puppets. Io sono il padrone, e tu sei il burattino. I am the master, and you are the puppet. Working in an antique store was hardly where Aislinn saw herself 5 years ago. But beggars couldn't be choosers in this economy. Her dreams of becoming someone had been crushed by the reality of life and the collapse of her support system after college, and she depended on this job to make ends meet. Still, something was charming about the Raven's wares, even if she did encounter some characters from time to time. Her cousin often asked her if she had ever felt spirits or weird energy working around the real skulls, the old Victorian dolls, or the taxidermy of the raven that gave the store its name. Like everyone in the town, Aislinn had heard horror stories about the objects sold from this place. A man bought a doll for his daughter, and they all vanished without a trace a week later. A woman bought a pretty ring and died in a freak accident with the ring on her finger. Someone bought an old statue and fell down their stairs. The truth was, Aislinn didn't believe in those sorts of things. Ghosts, ghouls, or energies. Sure, the place was creepy if you worked late alone on long winter nights, but it paid the bills. Those horror stories were coincidences. Plenty of people had purchased items from the Raven's wrath without an issue. Her cousin believed in that side of things so strongly. People whispered about her behind their hands. If Aislinn started believing, what would they say about their family? It was bad enough she worked here. The customers you never heard about were outsiders. A tiny voice in her head would whisper when she had this argument with herself. You've never followed up to check on what happened afterwards. She looked up from her phone when Eli barged their way back through the piles of antique junk piled around the place. A guy dropped off this painting today. I'm telling you, it's weird. Aislinn knew that everything here was weird in one form or another. She once had someone try to offer a jar of real human teeth. That had been on her second day, and regrettably, it had not been her last strange experience. They jerked their thumb over their shoulder. It's out the back by the rocking horse. I need you to label it up before you leave tonight. Did he give any details? Nah, I'm surprised you didn't see him. Dark-haired guy, glasses, had some sort of accent. She vaguely recalled someone coming in of that description when she'd been restocking some old hardbacks and had directed him towards Eli at the back of the store. She wouldn't have thought of him again, save for the odd look in his dark eyes. I sent him to the back to see you. He had this look in his eyes, like he'd seen things, you know? I offered him a fair price, but he didn't even want the money. He just said to take it. He didn't want money? Iceland repeated slowly. That's a bit weird, don't you think? Maybe it came with bad memories or something. Eli shrugged. Just make sure to get it cataloged to go out on display. I've got to head off. I'll see you tomorrow. The afternoon was quickly fading, the air becoming colder and far less welcoming inside. The eyes of the raven on the desk seemed to watch her every move, and the gentle ticking of the antique clocks suddenly felt ominous. Even the shadows of the shelves seemed to be lengthening, reaching out in her direction. Aishlin looked up from her book and paused. The store had fallen eerily silent. She felt her heartbeat increase as the hair at the back of her neck stood up. Hello? Why was she calling out? There was no one there. No one had entered the shop. The bell above the door had been silent for hours. A faint whisper seemed to be coming from the distance. Someone must have left the radio on in the storage room. She walked to the back of the store, trying to ignore the feeling that the eyes of the dolls were watching her. It wasn't like her to be this paranoid. She pushed the door open wide and reached in to grab the portable radio the manager insisted on keeping around. Her hand found the handle and lifted it out. It was switched off. Okay, she muttered, feeling a cold trickle of sweat run down her back. She set the radio down on an empty stool and worked away around the mountains of antiques to find the latest addition to the collection. Aishlin pulled the sheet off slowly and recoiled. The painting was of a hanging puppet, clearly based on the original Pinocchio story. It's dressed in traditional clothes against a gruesome backdrop of bones and the occasional skull. The entire thing was bordered by a swirling wine-red, blood red. A shudder ran down her spine as she took in all the gruesome details. The glass on the front was cracked, but that was hardly anything they couldn't fix. There was something odd about the break, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She turned the painting over to check the back of the frame and noticed a faded name on the back, too illegible to read, and an unmistakable bloody handprint. What the hell? The painting clattered to the floor as she reeled back, banging into a cabinet and screaming as the puppet hanging there swung into her face. Its painted smile seemed twisted into a cruel leer as she swatted it away, clutching at her chest. She took some calming breaths. She picked the painting up from the floor with shaking hands and turned it over, aware of her heart racing in her chest. There's no bloody handprint, only the faded marks of a name. You're going mad, she muttered to herself. You need to get out more. She carried the painting to the desk and started cataloging it, intrigued by the lack of an artist's mark. Even a quick Google search yielded no results, and after a few minutes, she brought it back to sit at the back by the dolls and puppets. She took a moment longer to stare at it and turned back to the front. There was a rocking horse in the middle of the aisle. No, that wasn't possible. She hadn't moved anything. Hello? She called out nervously. This isn't funny now. Come out. When no one answered, she tried to focus. Maybe it had been there before, and she had simply walked past it, not noticing. Eli had said the painting was out the back by the rocking horse. For a moment, her cousin's voice echoed in her ear. Though she tried to deny it, this was not the first time something like this had happened on her shift. Eli had laughed it off with her at the time, but she hadn't seen a bloody handprint last time. Eli had moved the horse. That's all there was to it. Aishlin walked back to the front of the store and stared out at the street. Across at the ordinary sight of the small local shop and the dress shop beside it. Maybe she needed a holiday. The radio started playing a Cure song. Had she turned it on? When had she brought it to the front? Suddenly, the dark shop seemed alien to her. No, now she was being stupid. She didn't believe in any of that stuff. A sudden tiredness overcame her as she sat back in her chair and started to doze, watching the cuckoo bird on the antique clock swing backwards and forwards, swinging, swinging. She could hear the distant creaking sound of a rope and sobbing cries, growing louder and louder. Oh, how painful! How painful! Why wasn't I good? Something was hovering in the corner of her vision. Every instinct in her body screamed at her not to turn and look, to run away from that shadow. She turned her head and saw the puppet from the painting. It raised its head and leered at her. Puppets have no soul, but they do a lot of harm. Suddenly, she was the one battling with the rope as the puppet laughed and screeched over and over. I want to be real. I want to be real. I want to be real. Aishlin leapt up from her sleep, feeling the phantom rope around her throat. Every item in the shop was facing her. They seemed to be looming towards her, skulls echoing the cries of the horrific voice as it cried out over and over. Whatever sick joke this was, she wasn't playing anymore. She ran to the door and tried to haul it open. It was locked. The room seemed to darken, and the sound of the puppet's voice, distant at first, became unmistakable, growing clearer with each passing second. Its whispers now unmistakably directed at her. Oh, che male, che male. She picked up a metal poker and walked to where the painting sat. The voice was louder now, its desperate cries in both English and Italian piercing her ears. What the hell are you? The voices paused. You should let me out. You're just like me. You're a puppet too. Aisling lifted the metal poker above her head. What? Are you? You should let me out, Aisling. She tried to move away, but her back smacked into a large cabinet. What the hell are you? My last puppet didn't obey. He brought me here. Un burattino che non obbedisce finisce sempre male. A puppet who does not obey always ends badly. You should let me out. I've always been here, waiting for someone to let me out. She realized then. What was wrong with the glass? Someone, something, was trying to break free from the inside. Her own reflection in the glass warped into a puppet's face, and she felt the weight of something choking her. No, she was not a puppet. She was a human. This wasn't real. I am the master of puppets. Puppets have no soul, but they do a lot of harm. I tried to take his soul, but he broke free. You will let me out. You are my puppet now. You saw it in the glass. You're like me. Aisling watched in horror as the cracks in the glass grew wider. It will end badly for you if you do not obey. She lifted the poker to swing it, and the hands of the puppets on display reached out and grabbed her throat, pulling her backwards. A bad puppet is of no use to me. I have been waiting for you. There's nothing to be done. One must really die good. Aisling screamed, trying to throw the puppets off. She twisted in their grip, seeing the cracks grow wider and wider. When you're not real, nothing hurts, Aisling. But the more I try to be real, the more I feel pain. Oh, the pain. How painful this is. Can't you feel it? The creaking of the rope was unbearable. The spiraling voice wailing and wailing as she begged for this to stop, for her to wake up, to let this nightmare end. Aisling woke in her chair. The clock read the same time as it had before, but something was different. Everything was different. At some point, the gentle light of the afternoon had faded into a gray gloom, bordering on darkness. This day seemed to be lasting an eternity. It was all a nightmare, a terrible nightmare. She saw it then. Her vision narrowed, and her chest tightened as she stared at it. The painting, mocking her from the back, as it always had. Maybe this was still a nightmare taken new form. Those horrible skulls leering at her, that noise, that endless noise. She approached it slowly and ran her hands over the cracks in the glass, feeling her skin crawl with revulsion. The glass was cold, unnaturally cold, like it was sucking the little warmth she had left from her fingers. I want to be real, Aisling. A voice whispered in her ear, you should let me out. I have waited so long. She grabbed the poker from where it lay on the ground and lifted it, bringing it down to strike the glass. A gloved hand reached out of the frame and snatched hold of her wrist, forcing her to drop the poker in shock. A puppet has no soul, but it can do harm. It cackled, drawing her closer to the frame. You're my puppet now. Your soul is mine." "No!" she screamed, grabbing at the nearest object, a porcelain bird, and throwing it at the puppet. "You aren't real. None of this is real." She felt the world begin to blur and tried to pull away from its grip. But it was too late. This couldn't be it. This couldn't be how this ended for her. This wasn't fair. This wasn't fair. "You aren't real," she cried as her mind began to break. "You aren't real." She felt the rancid breath of the puppet as it whispered in her ear, "And now neither are you." The quiet before. I bent low over the painting, the tip of my brush dotting at the corner of the landscape. It was just a tree, after all, but the spot of varnish that had welled up and discolored over the years needed to be removed. When the acetone leached into the surface, it peeled back, and my heart clenched. As the varnish removed a layer of paint, it revealed a subtle, dark patch of pigment beneath its surface. I sat back, a chill running through me. Underpainting. Maybe a hidden painting? I held my breath and stripped off my rubber gloves as I leaned back from the canvas. The visible image was a simple landscape, rolling hills and a few meandering roads, the colors muted by age and dust. The sky was a washed-out blue, and the trees on the horizon seemed too far off to be of much importance. It was nothing special, but that was never the point. What mattered now was finding out what lay beneath. I put on fresh gloves and lifted the painting with care. The canvas felt heavier than it should have, and I walked slowly over to the imaging lab. I positioned it carefully on the table, making sure that it was level, before placing the X-ray scanner above the canvas. The machine hummed to life, and I stepped back to the desk as the images slowly appeared on the screen. Beneath the visible landscape, buried under layers of thick, muddled paint, was a face. It was likely a woman, as I could see brush strokes of long hair curling around her face beneath the layers. The image was ghostly, faint, and slightly blurred, but unmistakable. A portrait. The faint outline of her features, her eyes staring somewhere just beyond the frame, sent a shiver through me. She was there, just beneath the surface. I didn't need to look at the X-ray again. I'd seen enough. I grabbed my phone and quickly searched for the artist's name. It was barely anything, just some obscure mentions in art journals, but something about it felt wrong. There had to be more. I spent the next few days buried in the archives. The museum had extensive access to resources on all sorts of artists, but the painting's creator remained elusive. There was nothing concrete about him, just scraps of details on a man who seemed as obscure in life as he was in death. The painting, this painting, felt like a living thing, pulling me deeper into its mystery, one layer at a time. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how much there was to discover. As I attempted to track down her creator, I peeled back the landscape layer by layer, revealing the portrait of a strange, haunting woman. Her pale face was framed by dark, flowing hair that reached her shoulders. Her gaze was distinct, distant, yet her features soft, as though she's looking at something or someone beyond my reach. There was a haunting grace, a quiet calm to her, but an unsettling depth in her eyes. The light in the portrait was soft and diffused, casting a faint glow on her skin and creating gentle shadows under her cheekbones, giving her face an almost ethereal quality. She sat as though she is regal, with a slender curve to her neck, though her pose was rigid and upright. Her gown looked heavy and richly textured, and almost blurred into the darker background. I found myself losing time, focus, and all sense of responsibility to this woman. Time had started to slip away in ways I couldn't explain. Days melted into one another, the world around me a blur as I spent more time with her. But no matter how much I uncovered, there was always a feeling that I was just scratching the surface. I pulled the stack of archived files towards me and sighed, taking another sip of the peach energy drink I'd come to rely on during these long stints of hunting down the elusive painter of the hidden woman. I'd discovered his name was Luigi Diovina, but beyond that, there were mere snippets of his life. An article about his madness toward the end of his life, and a lost last painting commissioned for a baroness. That article had sent a shiver up my spine. Could this be that painting? If so, I'd found a hidden treasure, but the Baroness remained unnamed, leaving me with no way to verify who she was. I leaned back in the chair, my eyes falling once more on the image of the woman. I hadn't been able to stop thinking about her. I wasn't the only one noticing the strain. Clara, Jenna, a senior restorer, pulled me aside. You've got to get back to the other works. The other paintings are falling behind. Victor has been asking about the St. Catherine piece. The museum's losing patience. I nodded, though I couldn't shake my growing unease. I'll catch up, I murmured, but even I didn't believe it. I couldn't focus on anything else. The painting, the Baroness had started to call her, had started to become the only thing I could focus on. Even when I tried, I found myself returning to the painting, as if it were calling to me. The woman's eyes seemed to follow me wherever I went. The deeper I investigated her, the more she began to consume my thoughts, my every waking moment. The article had come from a dusty file in the back of the local library, one that had been buried on microfiche and stuffed away in a back room somewhere. I'd had to bribe the front desk worker with a box of donuts and a large coffee, so she'd dig it out for me. But once I'd scrolled through 3 years' worth of articles on local auctions, I finally struck pay dirt. Haunted painting sells at auction. Deadly Baroness's portrait said to haunt Diavina's last known work, the headline read, giving much more detail than any other piece ever had. Though the Baroness was still unnamed, the full article mentioned the painter's dying days. Diavina's obsession with his final portrait left him a shadow of the man he once was. Those who knew him said he would often stand in front of the canvas, seemingly lost to time, as though the woman's eyes spoke to him. In his last weeks, it was rumored he painted over the face of the woman. This had to be the painting, but how had it ended up in our archives? Why had he painted over her face? The deeper I uncovered the painting, the more I believed that the woman, her secrets, were pulling me into a vortex of obsession, just as they had Diavina, Clara. My head jerked up, the soft brush in my hand. The Baroness's eyes were inches from mine, her creamy skin slowly being cleaned at my skillful hands. I blinked and sat back, gazing around the room for the source of my name. But no one was around. The office was strangely empty. I stretched my back, leaning slightly over the chair, and stood up to walk down the hall. Empty. And it was dark. Curious, I walked a few steps towards the archives room. "Clara!" I whipped around. No one was there, but the voice had come from my office. I rushed back in, but found only the Baroness staring at me. Why were her eyes fixed on me? Her gaze had moved. Her eyes seemed to be fixed on me, just as obsessed with me as I was with her. As I stepped around the stacks of files, my tools, and other paintings I'd neglected in favor of the Baroness, her eyes followed me around the room. I slowly sat down on the stool I'd left in front of her, sitting eye to eye with her. It was only us in the room, no one else. The next day, I gazed around Vincent's office as he sat in front of me. His arms were crossed over his chest, and the furrow in his brow only deepened as he watched me fidgeting. "Clara," he said, catching my attention. I glanced up quickly, my eyes locking on his face. "I understand that you're passionate about the restoration, but we're running a museum, not a one-woman project. You've been neglecting the other pieces for weeks now. You know how important the St. Catherine piece is. If it isn't ready by the next exhibition, I'll get to it," I said, cutting him off. I blinked rapidly. The St. Catherine piece was complex, but it was just a cleaning job, and since I didn't need to paint anything, I'd be able to finish it quickly. "Clara?" My eyes widened as the familiar, haunting voice called my name. Do you realize how much time you've spent on this? Vincent paused, his eyes narrowing as he searched for the right words. This obsession. Don't ignore me. I closed my eyes and pressed my fingers to my forehead. I forced myself to meet his gaze. I'll get it done. I just need a little more time. Vincent let out a frustrated sigh, his hands running through his hair. I need you to refocus. We can't afford this. Not with the exhibit coming up. Clara! My head snapped up, but it was just me and Vincent in the room. I glanced down, my heart pounding. His hands were strained, the same rusty red as the Baroness's dress, the splotches covering his fingers and seeping into his nail beds. Clara, Vincent said sternly, though his voice was also tinged with worry. You're letting everything else slip. He flicked through his computer and turned it to me, his stained fingers showing CCTV footage of the archives. And, is that me? I asked, gazing at the screen. Yes. You stood there for an hour like that, Clara. And this is at... His voice trailed off as he checked the timestamp. His face grew increasingly lined with worry. The point is, you haven't been yourself. You look like you haven't slept in days, Clara. This isn't you. Go home. Get some rest, he said, sighing as he adjusted the screen back to normal. I stood, and without hesitating, I left his office. And don't do anything with that painting, he called as I stalked out. But it was calling me. She was calling me. I glanced into the studio from the sliver of a window in the door. Through the frosted glass, I could see a distorted view of the painting sitting on an easel at my workstation. I could see her outline, the delicate slope of her neck, and the blood red of her robes. Suddenly, a shadowy figure moved across the threshold of my door, and I jumped back, startled. I hesitated, struck by fear. Not that someone had broken into my office, but that someone was going to take the Baroness from me. I turned the doorknob, but of course, I'd locked it, and I could see her right there. She was right there. A chill swept through me, and I shivered, closing my eyes as I dropped my hand from the door. When I got home, I was a little shocked to see Ethan on the couch, anxiously texting people. You're home? I said, dropping my keys and messenger bag by the door and taking off my coat. He gazed up at me and tilted his head. You're home, he said worriedly. There was no warmth to his voice, as if he was put out with me. I furrowed my brow. Yeah, Vincent sent me home early, said I looked tired. What, early? It's 9 p.m., Clara, Ethan said, putting his phone down. I blinked and looked out the window, my stomach clenching. He stood up, moving over to me as he noted the look of confusion on my face. What's going on, Clara?" he asked quietly. He reached out to rest his hand on the small of my back, but I pulled away, a feeling of overwhelming anxiety rolling through me. "Nothing. I can't." I shook my head and then glanced up at him. "I can't remember what I did. Vincent sent me home at 11?" I said, my stomach twisting again. I leaned into the kitchen counter, holding it tightly. Ethan looked shocked, his lips parting to calculate the math. "Okay, it's fine. We'll figure it out. You've just been stressed with the exhibition coming up, and all the work," he said, rubbing my back gently. I shook my head, reaching for my bag and rifling through it. My fingers crossed over something gold and metallic. I furrowed my brow and pulled out the ring of archive keys. It jingled in my hand, and I closed my eyes, shaking my head. "Why do you—" Ethan began, but I cut him off. "I must have just shoved them in my bag. It's fine," I said, taking a deep breath. I put the keys gently back into my bag and took out my phone again, checking the time. "It's late. I'm late. I came home late. I'm just tired," I said slowly, rationalizing things to myself. "Okay? Do you want to just call it a night? Get some rest? Maybe a shower?" Ethan asked. I saw his nose crinkle from the corner of my eye. Did I stink? My jaw twitched as I bit my cheek. "Yeah?" I nodded, but couldn't help the feeling that Diavina's barrenness had something to do with the loss of time. I closed my eyes, and Ethan brushed my hair back from my face. "Okay," I said, pulling away from him. He looked sad, but didn't move towards me as I stalked off to our bedroom, my phone held loosely in my fist. I stepped into the hallway leading to our bedroom, the light from the kitchen spilling across the dark-toned wood behind me. As I stepped towards the darkened bedroom, I felt a drift, and my head felt heavy. I stopped at the doorway and lifted my head. My fingers paused on the light switch. The room glowed with the dull orange light from the street lamp that streamed through the curtains. It made for an eerie sort of atmosphere. But that's not why I paused. My eyes were locked on the full-length mirror across the room from me. Its glassy surface should reflect only the bed, maybe the edge of my body, not the full shadow that stood ominously facing me. I blinked, frozen in place as I stared at the shadow. It almost pulsated, its shoulders hunched. It wasn't exactly shapeless, but it didn't have any defining features. Still, it felt familiar in a way it shouldn't have been. My fingers twitched, brushing the edge of the light switch. I took a shaky breath. I flipped the switch, and the figure was gone as soon as light flooded the room. The mirror was empty. My chest clenched painfully, and I leaned against the doorframe. Slowly, I flicked the light again. There she was, dominating the mirror, a black mass. But I knew her. I knew who she was. I flicked the light on again, and she was gone. But just as quickly, I flicked it off, and she was there. Panic rose like a bile in my throat. Distantly, as if underwater, I could hear Ethan calling to me, but his words were lost. Because the Baroness was calling me, her voice was rising in a screaming ring in my ears. I trembled with fear as I stepped towards the mirror, towards her. My mind fought my body as deep, panicky breaths burst from my chest. As I stepped up to the mirror, the shadow swelled and blossomed, the shrill screams rising to fever pitch in my ears. A hand wrapped around my shoulder just as the mirror shattered. It's with great pleasure that we present the final restored work of Luciano Diovina, the Baroness. Its beauty belies its tragic past, and we are proud to display it as a memorial to our departed co-worker. Vincent held the champagne glass aloft, then took a sip and stepped down from the podium. Beside him, the Baroness had been artfully restored, her colors vibrant, her skin creamy, her robes deep and gory slash of blood red. She looked almost youthful, brought back to life at Clara's skilled hands. It's a shame. An older woman stands next to a younger one, both eyeing the Baroness and the in memoriam plaque that had been hung next to her frame. The younger one nods, glancing nervously at the portrait. It's tragic. But did you hear about what happened with her boyfriend? I mean, the portrait, sure, it's gorgeous, but I heard it was bad. They glance at the painting. Like gruesome. Like she was obsessed? They cut off, clearly unsure how much to say. The older co-worker's voice drops even lower. Obsessed doesn't even cover it. But you didn't hear it from me. It's a horrible end, though. They each sip their champagne, the younger one shivering as if she said too much. The older glances down at her watch. Come on. The presentation. We're late. Eaten up with indifference. Eaten up with indifference. I wake to the sound of gnawing, or possibly the sensation of my leg being pulled. It's impossible to know exactly what stirs me, and I'm not even sure if waking is the right term anyway. Am I awake? I am lying on my back, looking up at a single strip light on an otherwise unsurprisingly white ceiling. There seems no possibility that I might move my eyes to see why my leg feels so odd. No more can I move any other part of my body, not even my tongue. This, a feeling that should induce panic, and yet it doesn't. Thinking about it more, There's no particular need to move my tongue, and I don't really know why I've become fixated with the challenge. But I am, and spend what I should imagine is around 1 to 2 minutes trying to poke it out. There is tapping from the corner of the room, and an occasional stifled cough, and I assume, from what I can see and hear, that I am in a small, mostly white office space, occupied by a lady who types on an old-fashioned typewriter. Hello? I imagine, unable as I am to move my lips, mouth, or my diaphragm to produce any sound. The secretary, as I'm now sure she is, carries on with her task, and I hear a faint ting, announcing the completion of a line, followed by a thoroughly satisfying ratcheting noise as she starts the next. Tap, tap, tappity tap. The pleasant sensation of being in a room with a hard-working, old-fashioned typist is marred a bit by the chewing, slobbering sound of whatever, or whoever, is gnawing my leg off. Oddly, it doesn't hurt being eaten, if that is what is happening. And I find it puzzling as to why I feel no pain. I make a monumental effort to object, but nothing at all happens. So I decide to stick with the peculiar feeling of relaxed easiness that is the sound of the diligent office assistant. Do you want tea, Derek? The gnawing stops, and my leg settles. Yes, that would be lovely, Diane. Derek sounds very much as if he might still have a large portion of my lower calf in his mouth. It seems I'm being consumed by another human. A human with a very out-of-date name. I hope he will stand up, pop into my eye line, so I can get a look at the fellow and try to communicate my displeasure at what he is presumably doing to me. Nothing happens as I try to move. Nothing at all, so I stop trying and lie still. There really is no other option open to me. The typewriter noises cease, and I hear the sounds of water filling a kettle. Ah, now that rings a bell. Yes, I am here to fix a dripping tap. Is the tap working now, Di? Derek says, confirming my recently revived memory. Seems fine. The plumber fixed the drip, and it turns off properly now. Apparently, I've done the job already. I do remember now. I hear water splash as she confirms her findings. But judging by the tugging sensation, Derek had lost interest and is back at his meal again. I am aggrieved at being referred to as the plumber, not because I'm not, or that I would prefer the use of my actual name, but more that I am being talked about as if I'm not present in the room. Well, Diana, that's not true. And it's actually rather rude to talk about me as if I'm not here. Hello, I'm here. I can't say. I conclude that the secretary is so used to her boss, if he is such, eating tradesmen, that she herself sees them as little more than snacks, like those sandwiches people buy from vans mid-morning. This brings me on to 2 further thoughts. Firstly, I should be hungry. I've not had my morning meal, and distinctly remember thinking that I would have something in the van once the tap was fixed. Secondly, Diana hasn't offered me a cup of tea. Both remembrances lead on to their own chain of smaller thoughts concerning the parking on yellow lines of my van and the suspicion that Diana is deliberately ignoring me. The kettle boils to the accompaniment of that lovely crockery chinking sound and spoon in cup noise that make me wholeheartedly wish I too could have a nice cup of tea. It isn't thirst, possibly not even a desire to savor the taste. It is a need to be included as someone rather than something. The something being a meal. There you go, love. Thanks, Di, lovely. I imagine the scene, having only their conversation to work with. Di handing a nice hot mug of tea to Derek. He, in turn, has now stopped chewing at my calf and is reaching around, taking his tea and pursing his lips for that first utterly pointless, too hot sip. Can't see it, though. Only the ceiling. Why do we try and taste the first mouthful of freshly made tea when it is quite blatantly and obviously going to be too hot? That is unanswerable and annoying that I have no opportunity to practice the futility myself. Oh, hot, shouts Derek. I feel my leg being pushed, though without sensation, presumably to make space for the cup. I am little more than a dish being nudged aside for the beverage, and I do find that particularly unkind. Being eaten is one thing. At least I am wanted and a part of things when that is happening. Unpleasant as it so horribly is, or at least should be. Why don't I mind? A chair scrapes, and the sound of something being unwrapped, followed by a commentary from the freshly seated Di. Lovely cheese and pickle. Derek doesn't feel the need to comment. I get the impression that the secretary is perfectly happy with the position of denial that I have allocated her regarding my presence. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense that she should be eating plowman sandwiches with crisps crunch, crunch in the same room as a man devouring another human. So Diana is in denial. Are the secretary's name and denial anagrams? I never was good at that sort of thing, and eventually give up with a vague feeling of a leftover E, but no certainty at all. Why isn't other stuff more prevalent in my head? The question of being unable to move, what it is that has happened to cause my current perilous predicament, and how might it end? I'm not really bothered, though. I just feel sort of relaxed, with a vague uneasiness at being ignored by Di. It dawns on me that I am now discussing events in real time with myself. But that's fair enough, given the circumstances. I do hope I'm not going mad, though. Or have I already done so? And this is all just a part of that. It isn't. It's definitely real. A sudden, vigorous tugging at my outer thigh causes me to rock slightly, and the ceiling to dance in a slightly dizzying fashion. Whilst I can't pinpoint the exact location of the peculiar, numb pulling, I reckon Derek is gnawing hard at a portion of muscle just above my knee. It stops, and I listen as he chews, then feel slightly nauseated when he takes a large sip of tea. I've never liked that, watching people with mouthfuls of food taking a drink. Still, it would be nice to watch anything now, other than the ceiling, which is devoid of entertainment since a large housefly disappeared a while ago. Lovely tea, Di? Is it Yorkshire? Yes, nothing but the best. You know I always look after you, dear. After some time, and a bit more leg pulling, the typing recommences, and I feel very glad of the happy clackety-clack, ringing bell, and satisfying ratchet noise. Time means nothing to me, and I don't feel that it is either dragging or speeding past. It just is. I must have been in a reverie of a sort, because at some point Derek has moved on to my other leg, starting at my foot, and I barely noticed the change. I feel hypnotically relaxed, uncaring, and unconcerned. I wish I could think of the word catatonic. Undoubtedly, but I think there is a better phrase that indicates something more than physical inability. Whatever it is, it shouldn't apply. What is happening to me should be alarming, but somehow I'm not as bothered as I most certainly should be. The lights go out after that, and I enter an entirely unknown passage of time before they flicker on again. However, many hours passed, and I'm guessing around 12. I still can't think of the word. It isn't euphoric, not at all. I hear someone taking their coat off, filling, and then switching on the kettle, and assume it to be Di, fortifying herself for another day at the office. I can't see anything but the ceiling and the fly, which has reappeared and is now as motionless as I am. It's Friday. There has only been one period of darkness since I arrived to sort out the tap on the Thursday morning. I must certainly have a ticket on my van by now, and know that my family are starting to wonder why I'm not home. But Mum won't be bothered. Not yet. He's probably stayed over at someone's. After going to the pub, I imagine her saying to my father, who wouldn't have cared less, a bit like me, really. Still, I feel no emotion at all. Not about Mum, or even Nicole, who I am supposed to be taking for a curry tonight. Odd that, not worrying about my loved ones, but not as strange as the very slight but growing resentment that Diana is deliberately ignoring me. That feeling, the one of being irritated at being ignored, is actually the only strong one left. All others apparently crushed by that overwhelming lack of concern that still hasn't got a name. Derek's just arrived and has wasted no time at all tucking into my right upper thigh. He's barely spoken to his secretary and is actually paying me all his attention, even if only to consume my leg. As for Diana, surely she could at least have bent over and looked at me when she came in. Rude, that's what it is. But even this emotion is pretty subdued, and I forgive her once the happy tappity-tap, clackety-clack, dinging starts. It's all very soporific. Good word, that, but not the one I'm searching for. My mind wanders a bit as the day progresses. A day of ham and lettuce sandwiches for Di, and a large portion of my groin for her boss. I remember arriving on Thursday and finding the address of a run-of-the-mill Victorian terrace office with a brass plaque on the door. I'd parked on a double yellow on a back street that was less busy, safe in the knowledge I'd be back pretty quickly if it was just a tap washer job. "Plumber's here, Derek," Diana had said, introducing me by trade rather than name to her boss, who'd barely looked up from his desk, choosing to acknowledge me with little more than a wave. After that, I'm not sure what happened. I'm jolted from my reminiscences by the sudden ringing of a phone. Another relic of the past, I decide, given its distinct ring rather than a modern electronic noise. How nice! It hadn't rung at all on Thursday. Perhaps they weren't that busy. "Hello, D&D accountants," says Di cheerily. Ah yes, D&D accountancy. I remember. Di isn't just a secretary at all, and she had referred to Derek as her husband at one point. I'd forgotten that. "Derek's a bit busy right now. I'm his partner. Can I help?" A bit busy, chomping through some inner part of me. The feeling of tugging is much less pronounced today, and I notice that my sense of hearing is slightly muffled. My vision not quite so acute. The strip light is very slightly blurred. I can still hear well enough, though, and the phone conversation should be providing some light relief to the ongoing tedium of immobility and lack of control. But no, I simply listen because it is happening, not for any other reason. "Yes, we can certainly take on your business, Mr. Court. Let me take down some details." I don't get bored of the half conversation. I just listen. In the end, I stop doing that too, and lie in my state of indifference as Derek slowly munches through my midriff. Eventually, the light goes off. Another amount of time passes, presumably an entire weekend. On Monday, it's more of the same. Clackety-clack and tuna salad on brown. The highlight of Monday, not that I measure events or grade them these days, is when Derek pulls violently on my left arm and I roll slightly to one side. I'm treated to a slightly blurred image of Di eating a chocolate biscuit and reading from a lovely old leather-bound diary before Derek pushes me back to a more prone position. It dawns on me in that briefest of moments that Diana doesn't own a computer. I find that most peculiar, but decide not to dwell on it too long. It's a lot harder to hear now. The phone rings twice, but I can't really hear the conversation. My sense of smell is still okay, and I recognized the metallic odor of what must be me. Alongside myself, I detect Di's perfume and the furniture wax polish that has been used on the beautiful antique oak and leather-topped desk. I recall being in the center of the office. I'm on that desk now, or at least some of me is. On Tuesday, there's a delivery. I can't really hear much now, and my vision is so poor that there is either darkness or light, little else. So I don't know who has rung the barely audible buzzer, or what it is that Di had gone to the front door to collect. Tappity-tap, but only just. I miss the ratchet sound and barely hear the ding. A week has passed, more or less. I realize that there is little more of me left than a head, and possibly a small bit of neck. Derek, it seems, is quite greedy. The very last thing I am aware of is the light flickering. On, off, on, off. It doesn't usually do that, having to date been a fairly decisive piece of electronics. A very muffled voice. Di, I think, lights on the blink. We'd better call an electrician. Yes, I hear Derek mumble through a mouthful of something. I'm about ready. Clackety-clack, and one last ding. Apathy. That's the word I was looking for. I wake to the sound of gnawing. Or is it the sensation of someone or something pulling at me? In the confusing half-second that exists in that time between consciousness and otherwise, it is very difficult to know what's real and what isn't. The hunger, it happened overnight. One evening, the whole world was bathed in the rich hues of a setting sun, the sky painted in oranges and purples. The next morning, everything had turned gray. Not just dull or faded, color itself was gone. The trees, flowers, ocean, even people's skin and eyes had become mere variations of black, white, and gray. It was if reality had been drained, leaving behind a lifeless, monochrome wasteland. At first, scientists tried to explain it as some anomaly in human vision, a mass hallucination, an unknown pollutant in the air. But when they dissected plants and animals, their tissues were colorless at a molecular level. Screens, paintings, dyes, nothing could produce a single shade beyond the grayscale spectrum. Then, people started disappearing. It wasn't like normal vanishing. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away. One moment, someone was there, and the next, gone, like they had been erased from existence. The only thing left behind was a faint, smudged shadow on the ground, as though they had begun to dissolve before vanishing entirely. Escher had been watching it happen for weeks. He kept a notebook where he marked every missing person in his town, tracking patterns, trying to make sense of it all. At first, the patterns were unclear, just a slow trickle of missing people. The painters, the poets, the dreamers, those who had dared to whisper about color, to grieve its absence, were the first to go. Then, it was the children who still dreamed in color. Their small voices describing the impossible. A sky that wasn't gray, a sun that burned gold. Each one disappeared without a sound, leaving behind nothing but that eerie, smudged shadow. Now, Escher could feel it watching him, lingering just at the edge of his vision, a weight in the air that pressed against his skull, cold fingers at the nape of his neck. The more he thought about color, the stronger it became, like a slow, suffocating whisper wrapping around his mind. He had a theory, but it curdled in his stomach like rot. What if whatever took the color away was still here? And what if it didn't want anyone to remember what had been lost? Escher kept his theory to himself. He had seen too many people vanish after speaking too freely. But in the quiet of his apartment, under a single flickering bulb, he scrawled his thoughts into his notebook, pressing the pencil so hard against the paper that the tip snapped. That night, sleep came in restless waves. Dreams of golden sunrise, of green forests and sapphire oceans, flickered behind his closed eyelids. Something else lurked there too, a whispering void pressing at the edges of his vision, a presence that noticed him. He woke with a start, heart pounding. The bulb above him flickered more erratically now, casting sharp, jumping shadows across the walls. Then he saw it. A smudge, one of those gray stains on the floor near his desk. It hadn't been there before. It looked like the others, the ones left behind by the vanished. But he was still here. Escher reached out a shaking hand, brushing his fingers over the smudge. Ice shot up his arm. His breath hitched, his vision wavered, and for a split second, he saw something, a figure, a shifting mass of darkness standing in the corner of his room, featureless, faceless, but watching him, waiting. The moment passed, and he yanked his hand away. The thing was gone, but he knew it had been real. He flipped open his notebook with trembling fingers. If he was right, he had limited time before it came for him. He needed answers. Somewhere out there, someone knew the truth. Someone who was still alive. Escher didn't sleep again that night. He sat at his desk, staring at the smudge on his floor, waiting for it to move. It didn't, but something else did. A creak in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, his breath hitched. He lived alone. The sound came again, closer this time. A dragging shuffle, like bare feet sliding across wooden floors. Escher reached for the nearest object, a rusted letter opener. Pathetic, but it was something. He moved toward the door, silent, his pulse slamming against his ribs. He pressed his ear against the wood. Nothing. Then A whisper, not words, just a sound. Something wrong, like wind whistling through hollow bones. Escher yanked the door open. The hallway was empty, but the walls weren't. Long, uneven handprints streaked the wallpaper, dragging downward, as if something had clawed its way along. The air was thick, pressing, like he had stepped into a vacuum where sound and light had begun to fold in on themselves. Then he noticed the door at the end of the hall. Apartment 203. No one had lived there for months, but now it was open. A sliver of darkness yawned beyond the threshold, impossibly black, deeper than shadow. Something was inside, watching, waiting. Fingers slowly emerged from the darkness, wrapping around the edge of the door, not quite human. Too long, too thin, curling around the edge of the door. The skin wasn't just gray. It was wrong, shifting like static, like it wasn't fully real. The fingers twitched. Escher bolted. He didn't stop until he was outside, breath steaming in the cold air. The city was dead silent, buildings looming in their gray-scale monotony. But something had changed. The streetlights flickered, and for the first time since the color vanished, Escher saw something new. In the distance, above the rooftops, high in the night sky, a single, pulsing red light, the first color he had seen in weeks. And deep in his gut, Escher knew. It was calling to him. He had two choices: run the other way and pretend he never saw the red light, or go to it. Every survival instinct screamed for the first option, but something deep inside, something primal, pulled him toward the second. It was the first color in a world that had been stripped bare. It was wrong, unnatural, but it was something. His feet were already moving. The city was eerily empty. Cars abandoned at intersections, their windshields coated in dust. Storefronts remained open, shelves half-stocked, as if people had simply walked away from their lives. The red light pulsed, steady and slow, coming from the tallest building in the city, the old communications tower. As Escher approached, he felt it before he heard it. A deep, low hum, subsonic, just beneath the range of hearing, but strong enough to feel in his bones. The street lights flickered in time with it. A shadow moved up ahead. Escher froze. A figure stood in the middle of the street, facing away. Motionless, the man, or what had been a man, wore a tattered suit. Its fabric faded to gray like everything else. Something was wrong with him. His arms hung too long at his sides, limp and lifeless. His head titled slightly, as if listening to something Escher couldn't hear. And then, slowly, the man's neck snapped back, bending at an impossible angle. His face. Escher sucked in a deep breath. The man's eyes were gone. Just smooth, gray skin where they should have been. His mouth hung open in a silent, gaping O, like something had hollowed him out from the inside. And then, without moving his lips, a whisper slid from his throat. You shouldn't see the color. Escher ran. His breath came in short, sharp gasps, feet pounding the pavement. The communications tower loomed ahead. The hum grew louder. The street lights died. Darkness swallowed everything except for the red glow above, pulsing faster now, more urgent. Something was chasing him. He could hear it, a skittering, impossibly fast, limbs scraping against the pavement. The tower doors were open. Escher threw himself inside and slammed them shut. Silence. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He took a shaky breath, turning to face the interior. The building was empty. An old stairwell wound up in the dark, leading to the roof. The red glow pulsed from above. There was a voice. Not from behind the door, not the stairwell, but from inside the room. A whisper, slithering through the air like a breath against his ear. You were not supposed to remember, Escher finally realized. The red light hadn't been calling him. It had been warning him. He turned slowly, his breath shallow. The room was empty, but the whisper had been right next to him. The red light pulsed above, faster now. Urgent. He forced himself forward, gripping the stairwell railing. He had to reach the top. He had to see whatever was waiting for him. The climb was endless. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls. His vision swam, his skin prickling, like something unseen was brushing against him. The climb ended at a door, rusty, slightly ajar. Beyond it, the red glow bled into the darkness. Escher pushed it open. He walked out onto the roof. The city stretched out below, dad and colorless. At the center of it all, perched on the tower's antenna, like a grotesque, broken thing, whatever it was not a machine. It was alive, a shifting, writhing mass, its surface pulsing with sickly veins of red light. It had no defined shape, no eyes or mouth, just an undulating, wet mass of twisting tendrils, each one ending in something horrifying. Faces, not full heads, just faces, half-formed, stretched, and distorting, mouths open in silent screams. They flickered in and out of existence, as if trapped. Escher knew, deep in his bones, these were the ones who had vanished. Not erased, not destroyed, absorbed. His stomach twisted, and his knees nearly gave out. The red light flared. And suddenly, he remembered. The color hadn't been taken. It had been consumed, and the thing was still hungry. A shadow loomed from behind him. Escher turned just in time to see the eyeless man from the street standing in the doorway. But he was different now. His face was melting, the edges smearing like wet charcoal, his features slipping away. The man took a step forward, then another, and with each step, his body blurred, losing detail, like he was being erased in real time. "Join us," the voices whispered. Escher staggered back. The fleshy mass of faces quivered, responding to the movement, its tendrils stretching toward him. The eyeless man, if he even was a man anymore, took another step forward. His form blurred, warping like wet ink, his face melting away completely. Escher tried to run, but something grabbed his ankle. Ice shot up his leg as a tendril snaked up his calf. It wasn't solid, not exactly. It was like touching static, buzzing, shifting, eating away at him the moment it made contact. A dark gray substance was oozing out of his skin like ink in water. He kicked, thrashed, clawed at the rooftop, but it was pulling him in. More tendrils lashed out, latching onto his arm, his torso, his face, cold, deep, endless. His vision swam. Shadows moved at the edges of his sight. His skin tingled as something deeper than pain rippled through him, like he was being unraveled. The voices rose in a distorted, guttural chorus. "Join us," Escher gasped. And for the briefest moment, he saw everything. Not just the city, not just the rooftop. Beyond, the world before color disappeared, and the thing that had come before that, something vast, endless, watching, waiting. That fleshy thing of faces wasn't the beginning. It was only a fragment of something much worse. The red light pulsed one final time. Then it went out. Silence. Darkness. A whisper rippling through the void. Now we are free. High-speed train. Congressman David Chen found himself where he never guessed he'd be. The dining car on the express. A high-speed train humming through the Hungarian countryside. A patchwork of browns and gray dirty snow flashed by. Abandoned Soviet-era factories passed surreal in skeletal frames, riddled with broken windows and crumbling walls. David's head pounded. Nausea caused him to sweat. He hated trains, but loved his wife, and the Prague conference was over. Just one more meeting, and then he and his wife could take a river cruise out of Budapest. Studying the wine list across from David sat Marcus Blackwood. When the waiter came, he ordered a 2016 Tokaji. The waiter paused and bit his lower lip, avoiding Blackwood's eyes. "We only have a 2018. Your boss promised the 2016, Blackwood said, stroking his precisely trimmed stubble. "I suggest you find it, or else." David noted his old friend, the Blackwood he'd grown up with, the new director of Aid Alliance, had mastered making threats. "Trains have a finite quality," Blackwood mused as they waited for the wine. "Once you're on them, you can't get off." David sipped water from a crystal glass. "But you can change the destination. That depends on who's controlling the switches," Blackwood said. "By the way, how's your Sarah? She starts Columbia in the fall. Is that right? The tuition must be a killer." His stomach rolled over. How did Blackwood know about the Columbia acceptance letter? "She's fine. Elizabeth and I are quite proud of her. I saw you with Elizabeth at the Prague conference." "Vacation?" "Yes. Doubling up the conference with time in Budapest." Blackwood winked. "And a write-off for the entire trip?" Blackwood tossed his right hand. "I was thinking about how we've known each other since the early days. Hell, I was at your wedding. We're warriors, you and I. Into the breach and all that. Well, this warrior is getting tired of the congressional grind. I'm thinking of not running next term. Call it quits." Blackwood laughed, his thick frame tight against his dress shirt. "Say it ain't so." "No, I would quit. But there's more I want to do. A few years, maybe. Then on to the speaker circuit. Or maybe a pack." The waiter returned with a 2016. "We're in luck, Mr. Blackwood." He opened the wine, offered a taste, then served them both. He carefully placed the bottle on the immaculate white tablecloth. "About your upcoming committee vote," Blackwood said. "Aid distribution, of course, is of paramount importance. But with our audit showing only 30 cents on the dollar reaching recipients, there's some pushback we're fighting against." "I've reviewed the proposal," David said. $8 billion might take some time to get through committee." Blackwood adjusted his broad shoulders and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We need to think about this from the 30,000-foot view," he said. "After all, think of the optics. We're supporting democracy, fighting corruption, and aiding fledgling governments who need the world's help." The waiter refilled their wine glasses while the two men looked on. When he left, Blackwood gulped his wine, leaned into the table, and reached out to adjust David's tie. "Our organization believes there's a benefit to a network of partners. We need expertise to walk us through a complex banking system, the regulatory environment. Would you consider getting involved? A non-profit, hip deep in money laundering," David thought. "Excessive compensation, shell companies. A big plunge for a guy who doesn't fudge on taxes. Never has. Never will. I'm a congressman. I can't touch this, you know that," David said. No. "Your role would be legitimate, I assure you," Blackwood said. That's what the advisory board is all about. Insurance for, he chuckled, derailments. We want you as a board member after your term ends. It's just, well, in the meantime, we'd like your advice. As a friend. The dulled rush of an opposing train sped by their window. Blackwood steepled his hands in front of him. How's Elizabeth's gallery, by the way? Her art might be worth more once she's passed. Of course, that could be decades away. We certainly don't want any harm to come to her, do we? Blackwood looked down and cut another piece of his steak. David's fork froze on the way to his mouth. He felt anger ripping his insides at the veiled threat against his wife. After slowly setting his fork down, he picked up his wine glass. His hand shook as he gripped the glass, but he gripped harder, and then harder still. The train entered a tunnel. David lost his concentration, diverted by the sudden brightness of the two men's reflection in the window. He stared at the image, but the man in the reflection who looked like him didn't stare back, but shattered the glass with his hand. David stared, transfixed. His reflection picked up a shard with his bleeding hand and wrapped the pointed glass with his cloth napkin. He then reached across the table and slashed Blackwood's throat. Blood splattered on the table as the reflection of Blackwood collapsed. The reflection blanked out as the train shot from the tunnel exit, the horn howling into the twilight. David stared at the wine glass in his hand. Blackwood was no longer across from him. David stumbled from the dining car. He lurched down the corridor to his sleeper cabin, fell into Elizabeth as she opened the door, reeled to the water closet, and retched in the toilet. "David, what happened?" Elizabeth called through the door. "My God!" The train approached the outskirts of the city. High rises ahead, pinned to the night sky. The lights in the windows staring down. Soon the train squealed into the station. Elizabeth gripped her husband's arm as they walked to the taxi stand, her eyes riveted on his face. "David? Darling? Are you okay? What happened?" "It's nothing," he said. She held him closer. "Are you feeling better? Talk to me. Did you forget anything?" David steadied himself against his wife. "No, I haven't left anything." As they walked to the taxi stand, he felt in his gut that Blackwood was gone. He realized he'd left him on the train. Some things you can never explain, he thought. But then he felt oddly privileged. He smiled, and even the grime of Budapest tasted a little cleaner. Fate, or science, or the devil himself had stepped in. But not God, he thought. No, this wasn't God. It was another presence who didn't like the alliance, weighing the direction of his daughter's future, his wife's safety, or the price for his looking the other way. "Your hand's bleeding," Elizabeth said. "It looks like a piece of glass." Killer date. No one suspects a good-looking man. He's too handsome to be a killer. And that's exactly what Michael Holloway used to his advantage. He spent hours at the gym, shaping his already good genes into a chiseled mask. It also helped that he was charismatic, with a smile that made most women double take. He had brilliant green eyes from his mother, paired with light brown hair from his father. At 6 feet in height, he was just a six-pack short of a photoshopped model. Michael knew he was different from a young age. He was 7 years old and on a family trip to Vermont to visit his grandparents. He was an only child of 2 loving only children, and that meant he naturally got a lot of attention. One night, as the adults were out back drinking and talking next to the fire pit, Michael was following his grandparents' old dog around the house. A chirp from the wall clock signaled 8 o'clock, food time. Right on cue, the dog's medicated kibble dropped into its bowl in the laundry room. He watched as the dog slowly scarfed up the food. Towards the bottom of the bowl, there was a clump of kibble that had not broken into smaller pieces. The old dog ate it up without noticing. It gave an abrupt, hiccup-like sound, and then started wheezing. Michael jumped back at first, but watched intently as the dog struggled to breathe. The hard clump of kibble blocked its windpipe. He did nothing as the dog walked around, not knowing what to do and unable to get air. It moved toward the doorway, but Michael stood up and closed the door. The dog looked up at him, its foggy eyes not comprehending what was going on. Michael waited until the dog collapsed. He brushed its soft fur gently until its pulse was gone. That was the first death Michael had witnessed, and so began his secret obsession with the morbid. He knew it was wrong, yet it got him excited like nothing else. Not alcohol, not drugs, not sex. Now he was in his 20s, a year out of college, living on his own in the big city. After years of reading and fantasizing about it, he was finally going to make his move. There was an old diner near his apartment where he often went for late-night meals on his cheat days. Eventually, the staff had gotten used to him and his usual order: a lettuce-wrapped burger with a side of saltless fries. One of the servers, a pudgy man with an acne-scarred face, told him on a particularly slow night that the diner was going broke. "We don't even have real cameras," he said with a laugh. When he noticed Michael look up at the camera on the ceiling, he added, "Those are empty. Pretty much a toy, just to scare people from getting any funny ideas." Michael laughed, flashing his pearly white teeth. The server laughed too, unaware of the mistake he had just made. It was a Friday, like any other for Michael. He got done with work early and went to the gym for 2 hours. To Michael, the only thing that got close to the feeling of a kill was a good pump. He loved feeling the tension of each muscle swell with each rep, almost as if he could feel them growing. Back at his apartment, he took a long shower before getting ready for the night ahead. The first order of plan was to masturbate. He had a big night ahead, and he was not going to let testicular impulses ruin it. Whatever Michael had done to fulfill his darker fantasies in the past, he did cautiously. There was no room for error, especially now. If he were to get caught, he'd rather die than go to rot in a prison cell for the rest of his life. He had gone over the plan over and over in his head, working out any kinks in the logic until he was confident in a plan he could execute. He wanted a pretty woman, someone easy on the eyes, who had moved to the big city on a whim. She had to also be living alone, with no one to check up on her. That is, of course, if he even met a girl that night. He didn't want to rush things. The last thing he wanted was to get overzealous and overlook something stupid. Most importantly, he couldn't get attached. He repeated those words like a mantra as he waited for his food. The bell on the door dinged him out of his head. That's when he saw her. Susan Bennett wanted an uneventful night. It had been a long week, and she wasn't looking for any action. But she knew Michael was the one as soon as she saw him across the diner. Her mind began to race, and she did her best to quiet it down. Keeping her eyes low, she followed the server to the booth right in front of the brown-haired model. If she had a type, Michael was it. She asked for water with no ice to buy her some time and pretended to read the menu. In reality, her eyes kept darting toward him. Her left hand crept into her handbag to check if she had what she needed should the night get frisky, and breathed out a sigh of relief. She also felt around for the pepper spray to use in case of emergencies. Her gaze swept over the menu as she tried to figure out how to approach him. With a head of shiny blonde hair and a curvy body, she wasn't usually the one to make the first move. She didn't have to. "Is this seat taken?" said a smooth voice. Susan looked up to find Michael standing in front of her. His smile distracted her, but she recovered fast. "No," she said, flashing a smile of her own. "It is not." Michael slid into the seat across from her, and she caught the scent of dirty vanilla. She liked it. "Hi," Michael said with an outstretched hand. "My name's Michael." "Susan," she said. His hand was cool to the touch. Susan was wearing a low-cut tank top, not for grabbing attention, but because she thought she looked good in it. But she didn't mind, as Michael's eyes quickly glanced down during their handshake. They exchanged some pleasantries and got to know each other. Susan found out that Michael works as a fitness coach, and Michael was amused when he found out that Susan was a freelance designer. "I didn't need to be in the city," she admitted to him. "But things at home were rough, and I kind of just needed an excuse to get out of there. You know, I get it," he said. "Parents can be a lot to deal with." "Yeah." Her voice was low. "I just feel guilty about ignoring them." sometimes. I mean, they raised me, put a roof over my head, and fed me. It feels the least I can do is call them once in a while, just to let them know I'm okay. Michael sat back and studied her face. It was beautiful, with the sharp features of her nose and jaw, accenting the curves of her cheeks and lips. When I was in college, I took a philosophy class with a pretty eccentric professor. One of the exercises he loved to do was hand out cards with random topics on them and encourage you to debate from that point of view. One day, I got a card that said, "Parents don't deserve anything from their children." Now, I don't think anything is quite that cut and dry, but for the sake of the exercise, I went with it. Susan sipped at her water as Michael went on. The point starts with a sort of analogy. Take your phone, for example. The person, or more likely, people, who made that phone will never use it. In fact, they make it knowing that it's not for them. There was a demand, and they were meeting it. It is a societal role that they choose. My argument was that it was the same for a human. There is a demand, an ecological need to reproduce, to keep the species alive. A person who chooses to have a baby is, in effect, meeting the market demand. To expect something back, monetarily or otherwise, once your job of raising that child is done, is not part of the contract. Michael sat back with a deep breath. Of course, there are holes in that argument, as my classmates pointed out, but you get the gist. Susan watched Michael as he got a sip of his own drink, an iced tea lemonade. "Switched tables, I see," said the server, sliding a lettuce-wrapped burger in front of him. "Here's your order, Michael." "Thanks, Brittany," Michael said. He looked back at Susan to find her smiling at him. He shrugged. "I come here often." Susan's server came back to take her order. "A buffalo chicken wrap, please," she said. He scribbled it down and left to place the order. The conversation continued, nearly uninterrupted, for an hour. By then, Susan had already made up her mind on what she wanted to do. And so had Michael. Michael paid for the meal, refusing Susan's attempts to pay him back. "You saved me from a lonely dinner. This is the least I can do." The city air was cool, and it gave them an excuse to move closer to each other as they walked. Michael said, with calculated hesitation. "I apologize if it's too soon, but my apartment is a block away. I was thinking maybe we could go up for a couple of drinks. Hang out?" Susan felt like it was her lucky day. "That sounds nice," she answered. "If we cut across this alley, we'll be there in 5 minutes." He paused and then added, "If you're okay with that." She said she didn't mind, and they turned into the alley that led to the back of Michael's apartment building. It was quiet inside the halls, and they shook the chill out of their bones. "I live on the 6th floor. We can go wait for the elevator, or we can just take the stairs here. I can't disappoint Mr. Health Coach now, can I?" "Stairs it is," Michael said, holding the door open for her. Things were going better than he could have hoped, and he did his best not to let his anticipation show. However, as they walked up the stairs, one thing began to bug him. A nagging voice in the back of his head that asked one simple question. Do you love her? He told himself to not get attached and pulled out the door to the 6th floor. It's the second door on the right, 607. The hallway was empty, and there were no cameras in the stairwell. No one knew that she was there. Michael opened the door to his apartment and let her step inside first. He had lit a candle while he got ready, and though it had been nearly 2 hours since it was out, the fragrance still hung in the air. This is a nice place, Susan said. The studio apartment was sparsely furnished, but everything felt purposeful. A rustic red couch paired with an oak coffee table. A matching oak dining table sat in the corner of the kitchen area. Numerous paintings hung on the beige walls, and a few plants bordered the sliding door to the balcony. Thank you, he said, taking her coat from her and hanging it in the front closet. He brushed his hair out of his way and smiled to himself. She was here. Everything he wanted. He took a second to admire her a distance as she looked at his record collection. So, what would you like to drink? He asked. She said. Anything strong? Like a whiskey? Michael knelt down and picked up a bottle of aged Kentucky bourbon. Will this do? Works for me. Michael took out 2 glasses and dropped in 2 thick blocks of ice. This a sweet collection you got here, Susan said. Do you mind if I play one? Go right ahead. The records were alphabetically ordered, and Susan slid her finger along the slide until she made it to Kind of Blue. She slipped it out of its cover and put on the record player. Michael froze when he heard the first few notes of his favorite record, and then shook his head. Great choice, he said. He took up the glasses and walked over to her. They sat down together on the sofa, sipping at their drinks and taking in the music. Susan closed her eyes and laid her head back. The sight was so dizzying that Michael placed the cool glass against his temple. I'll be right back, he said. He placed his glass on an old jazz-themed coaster and walked into the bedroom. He got what he needed, a candle and lighter, but stood in the dimly lit room a while longer. He pictured his hands around Susan's throat, and his heart rate picked up. He held his breath for a few seconds, and then slowly let it put. Then, once more, his fingertips began to get tingly, and he knew he was ready. When he went back into the living room, Susan was staring out the sliding door. She jumped when he flicked the lighter. Do you like vanilla? He asked. Susan nodded, and then returned her attention to the city outside. Michael grabbed his drink and downed the rest of it. Did something catch your eye? No, Susan answered. It's just this city. Always so alive, so big. It just reminds you how small you really are. Michael adjusted his posture and approached her from the back. Not to me, he whispered. Not in here. Susan turned around to face him. "You think so? From where I'm standing. You're all I see." He leaned forward slowly and waited, eyes locked, for her to move in. She hesitated for a second and then closed the distance. The kiss was explosive. Once their lips met, they did not separate. Michael closed the blinds with one hand while the other caressed Susan's face. His thumb gently brushed her smooth cheeks. Michael's hands snaked down, and without missing a beat, he picked her up. His firm hands supported her thighs as he walked toward the sofa. It wasn't until he laid her down on the sofa that their lips parted. Susan glanced at the one empty glass on the table and grabbed her own to finish, as Michael made a show of unbuttoning his shirt. His pecs were dusted with curly brown hair, and Susan ran her fingers across his chest. Michael bent back down to kiss her once more. His hands ran along her body, his mind resisting the urge to carry out the plan he had set out on. Every time he worked up the courage to move his hands to her neck, his heart pushed them down. Susan moaned lightly under him, and he thought of his own pleasure. His heart rate picked up once more, and the tingling sensation returned to his fingers. As they kissed, he put his left hand around her throat and began to give it some pressure. Susan didn't react, either unaware of the sensation or unbothered by it. After a few moments, he tightened his grip. Susan pulled away from him, but still didn't fight him. She simply stared up at him, her breath caught in her throat, doing his best to keep his heart rate under control. Michael closed his hand around her throat even further. Worry flickered in her eyes, but panic didn't set in until Michael put his right hand around her throat too. His hands wrapped all the way around her delicate throat, and she began to flail as she realized what he was doing. Her hands slapped at his biceps and then reached hopelessly for his face. She tried to croak something out, but he tightened his grip further still. For a moment, he thought he saw her laugh to herself, but it was soon replaced by a deadpan expression as her brain lost oxygen. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and he kept squeezing with both hands, watching her intently as the life left her body. Her body stopped moving, but he didn't relent until he was sure of what he had done. There was no going back. As he pulled his hands off of her, her body gave one final shudder. Michael's breathing was heavy, and a thick layer of sweat coated his head. He stared at his hands. If not for the fact that he could see them attached to his body, he felt as if they were not his own. He started to stand up, to move to his room, to grab his camera, when he stumbled to the ground. Disoriented, he sat up on the ground. His foot had knocked over Susan's purse, and a small white bottle rolled out. His vision grew blurry as he reached for the bottle. Inside were the remnants of a fine, white crystalline powder. Michael rolled the bottle over until he saw the writing on the side in cute little letters. Aconite. He dropped the bottle and tried to stand, but his muscles refused to hold him up. He collapsed on the ground. Michael's heart began to skip beats, and all he could do was lie on the carpeted floor and stare up at Susan's outstretched hand, lifeless. The last thing Michael saw was the tattoo of a dog on Susan's wrist, its black eyes staring down at him. So today's story has come to an end. Or perhaps it never really ended. There are mysteries still there, questions still unanswered, and sometimes things that seem to only exist in stories can creep into reality in unexpected ways. Are you sure that when you turn off the sound, everything around you will still be normal as before? Or is there something watching you? Either way, always remember that these are just stories, or at least we want to believe that they are. If you like moments of suspense, tension, and breathlessness, don't forget to follow me so you don't miss the next stories. And next time, when you come back, make sure you are ready, because what awaits you may be even scarier than you thought. See you again if you still have the courage to continue listening.